Hello, and welcome to Let's Make a Top-Down Shooter. This video is about building a data-driven user interface. To start, we're going to build the Mission Info Struct. We're doing this in C++ instead of the editor to save against future potential headaches with Unreal versus structs. If you go and change a struct that's owned by the editor, it can blow up quite a bit of things. We're adding this to our project header file for convenience. However, you could also just create another header for all of your data objects and do it there. The caveat of doing it this way, however, is that macros like ustruct or generated ustruct body specifically create and rely on generated files, which we have seen many times. Up here, the name of the file, .generated.h. The base file for a project does not include that, so if we're going to include this, actually first I'll show you that. If I go to build, you'll get this error, missing type specifier int assumed, and that does not give you a lot of info. So in here, we can just do our include tds.generated.h. And good to go. So this mission info struct, we have a title, description, the map it will load is repeatable, which we'll use in the future to show or hide the mission from the UI if it's been completed. And then prerequisites would be a list of other missions that need to be in the completed list to be able to show up. Both of these we're going to deal with in a future video. Lastly, if you want your ustruct to be usable in a data table, which we do, you need to inherit from table row base. So with that set up, I'm going to create another new folder here. We'll call this data, or if you prefer, data. In here, I'm going to go to miscellaneous data table. When you create a data table, it needs a struct for the row. So in here, we can then pick our mission info. We'll call this DT mission info. When we open that up, you can see that it has a row name, which is not part of our struct, and this is unique. Our title, description, map is repeatable and prereq. I'm going to add 2 entries, and you can see right there it adds that little extra bit because, again, that's unique. We'll call the first one sum mission 01, and this one sum mission 02. In the first, we're just going to put some title, some description. The map will be a sum map. This one will be repeatable and have no prerequisites. The second one will be some other title, some other description, and the same map. It will not be repeatable and it will require some mission 01. With that set up, we're going to add a bunch of functionality for using that into our game mode. First of all, however, I will show you a fun little problem that can be easily caused in here. It doesn't really matter where it is. I'm going to get game mode. I'm going to cast this BP. I'm going to type cast to BP. Okay, so it's not showing BP game mode, maybe because I added an interface, but if I just go back in here, open up game mode, go back in here, oops, then I drag out cast to BP, and now it has game mode. So game mode in the default C++ project has a bit of functionality that sets up its default pawn class, and that is third-person character. So by putting this little bit of code either in the third-person character or in the UI that's owned by the third-person character, this generates a circular dependency. So once that's done, if we close the editor, if I then launch the editor again, you can see it gets up to 75%, says initializing. The log basically just shows a little bit of what it was doing. Sometimes it'll show that it was compiling some blueprints and whatnot, but the end result is that it has stalled, and it does not give you a good indication of why. So I can just force stop that. So if that happens in your project, two ways to resolve the issue. The more common way, because people don't generally know, is then they have to back out using source control, and you should always be using source control to get back to the changes that may have caused the issue. In this case specifically, however, it's effectively caused by the class finder here. So as I said, the third person character, there's a reference to it here. If we then comment out this bit and hit F5 again, it'll compile that, launch the editor again. And it gets past that point. So I'm just going to go back into third person blueprint and get rid of this. Now, while that is one way to work around the issue, it's not a good way. So I'll go ahead and undo that, relaunch. And back to working again. So the reason I'm showing this is because I do want functionality in the game mode for handling the data table. To access that information, or rather, I want to access that information from the mission table UI. And since the mission table UI is owned by the player character, that causes the circular dependency. So the other better way to get around it is we are again going to create a blueprint interface. I'll call this one BPI mission. In here, I'm going to create get missions. I would like this to be, actually I can leave that the way it is. I'd like that to be a function instead of an event, so I added an input variable. I'm going to do get mission details. This one will take in a mission name. This will be of type text. Actually, type name. And lastly, I'm going to make a load level, and this will take in level. So I just realized something I said incorrectly in the previous video, which is if your blueprint interface functions have an input, it'll create it as a function. That's actually outputs. So in this case, I wanted it, the missions to be sent back. This will be a name mapped to our mission info structure without an extra S. Our get mission details is going to return title, just text, and then, oh, well, that's good. I was going to switch it back anyways. Can't have a map with text. Also want our description and the map. Actually, the level. This will be name. Load level does not need a return value, so we'll leave it like that. In our game mode blueprint, we'll go to class settings, for our BPI mission. That will add them over here. You can see the colors will determine what type they are. For get missions, I want a local variable, which will be the same as the return value. So I'm going to call it the missions. It's going to be a type name. Is a map to mission info. In here, so to use data tables, we first want to do get data table row names. We choose our data table. This will return an array of row names, so we can for each that. With that information, then we can use get table, get table row, get data table row rather. Same data table. The row name would be that element. And then we're just going to control drag this out. I'm going to call add. This is the name. This is the row. With that array populated, we're then just going to drag that onto here. And when it's completed, we'll just return that. For our get mission details, similarly, we're going to get data table row. We have our mission name, which is the same as our row name. We use our data table mission info. We're just going to break this. You can also right click here and split pen. So I'll do it that way. And then you just return the values. Oh, I did call it map in one location. I forgot to rename that to level. But those map and level are kind of interchanged in Unreal anyways. Lastly, our load level is just going to call open level by name. All right, then we can create our UI. So we're creating another user interface, a widget blueprint. It is a user widget type, WBP mission table. This one will be a little fancier. So we're going to start with a canvas panel. Inside that canvas panel, I want an image. And that image, which does not need to be a variable, will just be the background. Hold down Control Shift, click that, it's the whole thing. Just going to make this darker gray. I'm going to then go into the HUD. I'm going to find our user created mission table, pop that in here. We're going to make this centered, Control Shift, center. I'm going to make it just 800 by 800. So then in here we can go and hit custom. Set that to 800 by 800. So our mission table UI, which will not be very pretty because that would take a much longer amount of time, is going to have a vertical box. That vertical box, which I'll call missions box, will be anchored from the top and I will make the size a static value of 600. So that means I can also put on the bottom a second canvas panel, which I'm going to call Mission Details Panel. That I will do from the bottom, and it will be a size of 200. So the benefit of using multiple canvas panels in one UI is that you can set the positions of them directly. The drawback is then this 800 by 800 changes, it's not going to be automatically reflected in here, and you're going to want to update this and make it look good again. So all we're doing in our mission details panel here is we're going to put in text, second text. This will be title text. This will be description text. And lastly, I want a button. So the title text is going to be anchored to the top there. It's got a size of 30, so this one I will anchor to the top as well, and then change the position Y to 30. The button will also be 30, so I'll make this 200 minus 30 minus 30. And then the button will be anchored to the bottom right. We'll move this out 10, which means now it's actually 40 instead of 30. So let's just make this one 130. It's still overlapping the box. Let's just make it 120. Right, this button's just going to have some text centered on it. The text is just going to be load. I'll make that a little smaller. We'll make our description text also a little smaller. All right, we need to make sure that both of these are variables. Our mission box also needs to be a variable. And then in our graph, I'm going to create a function update mission list. So this is going to get GameMode. So instead of casting this to our BP GameMode, I'm going to do does implement interface. This is for our BPI mission. And as long as it does, we can call get missions. Use that map to call keys, which will give us an array of keys. Use that for the for each loop. We then want to use that map again to call find based on that key. That will give us our structure entry. We're going to use that to break it. And here we're going to create a widget. So the widget we'll be creating, we'll worry about that compile after, is another widget. So we'll create this widget. This is WBP mission button, which will simply be a button with some text. I'll call this title text. That needs to be a variable. Let's call this mission button. is going to need an onClicked event. It takes us right to. We're going to want a variable for our WBP mission table. We want a mission title and a mission name. Mission title will be a text. Mission name is name. And this is a WBP mission table. All three of these, and you can't shift click those, need to be instanced, editable, and expose on spawn. In our event construct, we're going to have the mission table, or rather the mission title, and we're going to use the title text object to set text. So when this button is constructed, it will call set text on the text that's on the button based on the variable that was used during the create widget call. Down here, we're going to use the mission table to call a function, which will send along this mission name. So back in the mission table, we can then use WPP mission button here, and then that will show us that we have our mission table, which is reference to self. The mission title, and our mission name. Lastly, we then use our mission box to add child for this. We then also want a function, select mission, which will take the mission name, which is a type name. So that is what this is going to call. So this will be a select mission. So when a button is created, it will send along the mission title and mission name. On the construct, it will use that title to set the text of the button. And on clicking that button, it will then call the mission table and send along the mission name that it saved. When the select mission is used, we then also need to get GameMode. Use that to call doesImplement interface for our BPI mission. When that's true, we're going to call get mission details. Send along that mission name, which we can just call here, get mission name for the variable. We're using that to take the title text, control drag, set text for the title. Set the text for the description. And then just save this to variable. We'll just keep it called level. Lastly, we will want to make sure that our load button, which we will want initially hidden, to become visible. Lastly, since I didn't create it, I'll go back to that button. One clicked. And all this is doing is get GameMode, the same bit, does implement. And use that to call load level with this level. Now with that UI set up, we need to go back into our third person character in our init UI. We now also have our HUD. Actually, that's a saved variable now. I'll just drag it in over here. We want our WBP mission table. We're going to save that as well as a variable. And call our show mission table UI with false. Show mission table UI, no longer, we don't need our print string anymore. What we're doing here is we're branching if it's true, we want our visibility to be visible. When false, we want it hidden. All right, so hover over that, hit tab, pops up the UI. It's not loading the buttons properly. That's because I never called update mission list. So for that, I can just throw that in here. When it's constructed, it'll call it. Hit tab, there it is. You click on a button, it fills in the title, the description, makes the load button visible. Click on another. If I do click load, it just basically resets or reloads this map because it's sending a blank value or sending a value it can't find. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel or just want to download the project files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.